Welcome to the latest installment of The Curious Capitalist. The Curious Capitalist is a series of podcasts where we take the opportunity to not only speak to board members from the Conscious Capitalism Connecticut chapter, but also local business owners, startups and entrepreneurs from across the state of Connecticut. Welcome to episode 19 of The Curious Capitalist, brought to you in association with the Connecticut chapter of Conscious Capitalism. Today we are joined by Dave Hammer, who is the Executive Director of the ICA Group. Dave, welcome along to The Curious Capitalist.
Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Let's dive straight in then. Tell me about ICA. Tell me about what you guys do at the ICA Group.
So ICA is a nonprofit consulting company started in the late 1970s by a group of community organizers concerned about the impacts of deindustrialization in communities across the Northeast. And really it started with an idea of how do we use employee ownership as a way to save businesses in communities. And so really since 1977, that's what we've been doing. We've been using ideas of how to use alternative forms of ownership. They can be worker cooperatives, they can be employee stock ownership plans, they can be employee ownership trusts, nonprofit structures to both transform businesses and to create new businesses that really are centered around building worker voice, worker power, and worker wealth as a way to transform communities. So that's really the work that we do, is to try to build, support, and scale and grow those kinds of businesses.
So how did you get involved with ICA? How did you get to this point in your career?
Yeah, so ICA for me was a bit of a departure, honestly. I had a career actually in the labor movement doing research and analysis around organizing, supporting organizing campaigns in the labor movement. Had worked in the steelworkers, the garment workers, the healthcare workers, and was just looking for a change, looking for a way to use those skills to do something, and came across ICA. It was sort of there was literally a job posting, and I said, what is this organization? This seems strange. I didn't know a whole lot about employee ownership, but there had been actually on the list of donors, there were a number of people who I knew who had donated to ICA Group as a 501c3. And I said, well, if they like this place, it must be interesting. And so I applied, and that was 12 years ago. So joined as a consultant.
Wow.
And then in 2013, our longstanding executive director left, and I wound up taking over as executive director.
What do you wish you'd known before you started out on that career path and ended up in the hot seat of exec direct?
Oh, well, that's too long a list, honestly, too.
We've only got 25, 30 minutes, Dave. You're going to have to just keep it short.
Yeah, so I think that to me, the biggest lesson that I've learned is I've always sort of told myself that if you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any priorities. That's a sort of a lesson I've learned, or not even a lesson I've learned. It's a mantra I've used, and I've found that it to be true again and again and again, that really being focused on outcomes, so the things that you can focus on are the things that you're going to change. And we're trying to do a lot with a very small organization, and that work is really requires a lot of focus and energy. So that was the lesson I kind of knew intellectually, but have been learning emotionally for the last 7 years.
What would you say has been your biggest success, or one of the most memorable successes during your working career with ICA?
So early on, my successes and my sort of the work that I did is ICA was, when I first started at ICA, it was much more of a consulting company than it is today. I'd say we've transitioned from a consulting entity to a development entity in the last 5 years. And so early on, the work that I got to do that was really interesting was a lot of these consulting projects. We just learned new and amazing things around sort of organizations that were trying to transform things. In the last few years, however, and I think one of the biggest successes and most important things we've done is we help businesses transition from being conventionally owned to being employee owned through lots of different models. Our focus is on smaller businesses. There's very few companies that focus on small businesses, less than 5 million. We work with all sorts of companies, but businesses with less than $5 million in revenue tend to be our core focus. There's not a lot of folks who support those types of businesses in this area. And so over the last few years, what we've really done is we've really tried to build out a process that these companies that can go through that is efficient, that is affordable, that is successful. And so it's really been a process of like process improvement, of really building out and refining a product from being something that's kind of individualized, and each kind of one is a special little thing, which it's every project is special in its own way. But unless you have these sort of systems around how to systematize it and make it work efficiently, you wind up spending a lot of time and energy, which businesses don't have. They don't have the money, they don't have the time, they don't have the energy to do this. We've got to meet their needs. So the improvement of that process, which has really been led by kind of our core team of consultants in that area, that has been one of the most rewarding experiences for me personally.
How did you first get involved with or hear about the conscious capitalism here in Connecticut?
So it actually got connected to this through one of our staff members, who's actually based out of New York City and was attending events. And I had sort of been aware of conscious capitalism as an idea, as an organization, but not had been closely connected to it. But Shelley Miller, one of our staff members, attended one of the events, and after she attended, she said, "Dave, these are the people. These are the people we need to talk to. These are the folks who are thinking about business in the same way that we're thinking about business. And we really need to start figuring out how to engage and talk to them more." Shelley started going to a number of events, and we started talking through with them. But it was really an introduction from one of our staff members.
Those events have been fantastic. They're so well done, and they are a pleasant experience, and often you come away having learned so much and with so many great hooks and tips to really sort of integrate into your business, which is always good fun. Thinking about some of the key aspects of conscious capitalism, one of which is a higher purpose. What does it mean to you that your company has a higher purpose?
It's central to what we do. So we are a nonprofit organizations. We are driven around a mission, and we operate as a business, right? So we are, I think, a pretty unconventional nonprofit in sort of a lot of our operational ways, but it's really central to what our vision is. And that, we focus on three areas. We talk about voice, we talk about wealth, we talk about power for workers. That the businesses that we are working with, we want to center their voice. We want to help build, grow that wealth for those folks and build power for them. And so our work at ICA is really centered around those three elements. And it's really about working with businesses to transform their operations to do that, which it turns out is good for the business, and it's good for the workers, and it's good for the community. A business that is owned by its workers is rooted in that community because that's where they live. The workers are, committed to the productivity and growth and profitability and success of the business because they are directly tied, their income, their stability, their livelihoods are directly tied to that. And when they put more energy into it, they get more energy out of it. And it's good for selling owners because one of the things that we talk about a lot in our work is there's a lot of small businesses that wind up sort of disappearing or selling or closing because there's not a place to sell it. It's too small to really be sold to a competitor, but it's a great opportunity. It's a good, solid business. It makes good profits. It does well. There are folks who work there who want to keep those jobs. And what we can do is we sort of help folks realize that that's a possibility. So when our work is most successful, when it's connected to that vision. And we found lots of folks who sort of look at that idea of creating a different kind of business, giving back to the employees, transforming that, the way that they think about their interaction with the employees, that can really center it. So it's central to who we are.
What sort of language would you use to describe that culture, or does it have a definable character? What sort of language would you use to describe it?
Yeah, it does. The way I guess I would describe it best is its culture of participation and transparency. Probably the best way to think about a sort of a successful participatory business is one where knowledge and information is seen as the lubrication to make things work as opposed to power to allow things to grow. When information and knowledge shifts from being a mechanism of building power and becomes a mechanism for sort of a shared collaborative approach, that's really where the real shift occurs. And I think there's another element for us in that, which is around democracy. So we talk a lot about democracy in our worker cooperative work. Democracy can mean lots of different things. There's lots of different types of democracy. But to me, I say the two elements of a business that is, transformed in this way is one that is really opening up and being transparent around information and knowledge, and is trying to build out democracy, which is really about creating systems of rights and responsibilities. When you have ownership, you have a right around that, but you also have a responsibility around that. So it's doing more, but it's getting more out of that.
If a company wanted to make more of a shift towards being more conscious, what would be your advice to them?
So the first thing I think folks should really be thinking about when they begin this shift is talking about sharing information around the operations and the finances of the business. I always think that's the first step. I think it's the first step towards engaging people around kind of how to engage with the company. And it's the first step towards democratizing the sort of the information and the approaches of how a business operates. So I think the step of sort of, that transition of really opening up the door to what are the things that drive what we're doing? What are the things in terms of revenue, in terms of costs, and making sure everybody really understands that. To me, that sort of understanding of that business strategy and having that be something that's broadly shared is almost that sort of first step towards taking that step. The challenge is that, when you start adding into the sort of all of these different levels and issues around sort of there's lots of different, levels of what conscious capitalism can mean. It can mean things around how the business operates internally. It can mean things around sort of what the outcome of what the business is doing, thinking about that sort of triple bottom line in terms of how we're operating internally, but also around the outcomes of what are we actually doing? What are the impacts? What are the implications of what we're doing as a business? And so I think a lot of those kind of external issues that people need to think about in order to really transform a business to really be a really conscious capitalist business requires a pretty deep understanding on the part of management and the owners, but also the frontline employees around what that means. So to me, it's always that kind of that shared knowledge is the foundation of a lot of that power and a lot of that transformation for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that leadership and that vision to share with all employees, from the most senior to the most junior, and to be working on that common aim. So tell me, when you're not focused on your work, Dave, what do you do to relax? Are you into TV, sports? What are your hobbies?
So I live in Western Massachusetts, actually, and it's a beautiful place. And so when I get the chance, before COVID, I traveled a lot. I was on the road a lot. ICA works nationally, so I was traveling a lot. And so the idea was, when you're not traveling, be at a place that is beautiful. So for me, it's about trying to get outside. It's trying to enjoy the beauty. I'm probably less good on the winter side than I am in the summer and spring and fall. But it's getting outside as much as I can, enjoying the sort of natural beauty around this area.
Have you been binge watching television at all during these Corona times at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good confession. You tried to swerve it, but no.
Yeah.
So if you
my best self is hiking. My true self is
absolutely
is binge watching whatever the latest show is.
Honesty is the best policy, as my mum used to say. I think we're almost running out. I think I might just throw that question into more of these podcasts in the hope of getting some inspiration.
Right.
No, we're very blessed to have some incredible summers here in the Northeast. So actually, we've been out and about more so than perhaps other years, because we haven't been able to travel internationally.
Yes.
So actually, we've been getting out in nature, away from people as much as possible. And I'm sure come the winter, it's going to be a very different story. What do you think has been your greatest success, not just professionally, but personally as well?
Yeah, so I will say on a personal level, it does relate to sort of the professional side of things. So when I first became executive director of ICA, one of our board members made a point of saying, ICA has been around for a long time. It's had a lot of transitions. But one of the issues has been, it's really been the hobby horse or the vision of the current executive director. And it's gone through a lot of shifts and changes. And I really took that up as a challenge of saying, no, I want to build out an institution, an organization that is going to be moving towards creating more economic democracy in the United States. And it's going to be doing that in a really meaningful and powerful way. So when I started off at ICA, we had been a very successful 3-person consulting firm for 10 plus years. Wow. And it was great. And we did interesting, exciting projects every year. We made a real impact, and it was a fantastic job. I don't want to sort of discredit that. I think it was really amazing, but it wasn't a big enough lever to shift the conversation in the way that I felt we could. And so we've grown over the last 6 years to be about 20 people now. And I think we are, becoming not just an institution in kind of some of the thought leadership and intellectual property that we've sort of developed and created over the years, but in terms of the work that we're doing. And so that has been one of the most rewarding professional experiences that I've had is that, and it's been one of the most challenging ones. And we're not done. I like to think about our, we're a 46 or 45-year-old organization, 44-year-old organization that's just beginning to enter into its adolescence. And so we're in our kind of like growing awkward phase in some ways at year 44, but it's been a really interesting and rewarding process.
And what about personally? What's been your greatest successes personally?
Personally, it's got to be my kids. I've got 2 children, a 13-year-old and a almost 10-year-old. And when I see them and the things that they're doing and the lived experience that they have and the way that they interact with the world, it's easy to sort of give yourself like far more credit than I think probably parents deserve. But it's been one of the sort of the biggest joys is just to see them grow. And this has just been a really exciting time for them. These ages, it's been a really difficult time because they've been, because of COVID and the quarantine and all of that. But how they've weathered that, that has been, for me, the biggest thing is it's being that parent and knowing when to step in and knowing when to get out of the way. And I'm still figuring that part out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably will be forever.
More than likely. Well, on the flip side of successes, there's always fears. What has been your greatest fear that you've ever faced in your life?
So I'd say that on a professional level, the biggest fear is always one of not being able to fulfill the promise that we're making to the folks we're working with or to the people in the organization. So one of the things that, as we've grown as an organization, one of the things that I've sort of made as a personal commitment is that if you're coming on at ICA, unless it's explicit that it's a contract position for a very short period of time, that this is a long-term job, opportunity for you. And that requires not just, means when you're sort of growing the business, that you're not just doing that for, we're funded by grants, we're funded by, contracts as well, but we're funded by government contracts, and grants are a big part of it. And those have a beginning and an end. And so really the big fear is can we maintain the organization to be able to make the impact that we want to have and the commitment that we have to those people? So that's been, I think, one of the biggest challenges and biggest worries. We've been successful thus far, and we've maintained it, but I read an interview it might have actually been on a Conscious Capitalism podcast, but I read an interview or listened to an interview with a business owner who said, yeah, that anxiety never goes away, that fear never goes away. And that wasn't necessarily heartening, but it seems to be true. But that really has been one of the biggest worries. There are sort of, broader existential worries that exist, especially around sort of the consolidation of power by some companies that are not particularly interested in supporting community. That has sort of been a trend. And so fighting against that trend is part of what we do. That is a sort of existential threat or concern or fear that I have. But in a more narrow sense, I think on the day-to-day, that's the thing that sort of I'm focused on.
So Finally, then, to wrap up, tell me a little bit about your plans, both personally and professionally. I'm not going to say predict 10 years. I'm not. I normally say 5 or 10, as the old, adage goes. But 5 years, shall we say? Let's say 5 years, because the world is crazy at the moment. And I think 5 years is more than enough. Tell me about your plans, personally and professionally.
So my personal plans, I when I came on as executive director of ICA in 2013, my plan was I'm going to get this organization up to a place where it reaches a plateau or a point where it's stable and secure. And I don't think we're quite there yet. And so from a professional standpoint, the things that I would say is we really have two strategies at ICA. They're about creating networks of companies that are designed to transform industries where jobs are frankly pretty bad. So our work in that is in the childcare, the home care, and the alternative and the staffing sector. And so over the next 5 years, we want to be seeing sort of meaningful transformation in those industries. And what does that mean? That means more people, significantly more people who are paid a living wage, because most people in those industries are not paid a living wage, have access to meaningful benefits. Hopefully the government solves some of those problems for us, but in the absence of a sort of a governmental solution, that folks are able to access benefits and retirement and pay time off and control over their schedules. These are the things that we want to be doing. So it's about building these institutions that can have a meaningful impact on that beyond just a firm, but around sort of making a shift within the sector. The other key piece is when we think about our work in the sort of our public-private work that we're doing around employee ownership. The way that we really think about this is there are literally millions of business owners who are going to be looking at retirement in the next few years, and far too few of them think about their employees when they think about their exit. So one of our professional goals, like this is a goal for the organization, but mine in particular, is that a much, much larger percentage of folks, our business owners, are thinking about their exit plan in a meaningful and proactive way and are thinking about employee ownership as part of that. It's not the right answer for everyone, but it's the right answer for far more people than it is right now. So those are really the changes that I want to see, sort of the impact for ICA. On a personal level, one of my goals in the next 5 years is last summer, we did a pretty major remodel of our kitchen. Nothing structural, but a lot of work, and I did a lot of that work. And so would love to figure out how to do more of that stuff so that we can, be a better carpenter is really the objective on a personal level.
Oh, amazing. Fantastic. So. We must put you in contact with Gavin Watson, who is the chair of Conscious Capitalism. He's an incredible man who has built many, many boats. So what he can't do with wood isn't worth talking about, to be honest with you. Dave, it's been so good speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your time. How can people find out a little bit more about the ICA Group, get in touch with you, for example? Do you have a website, social media, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so our website is icagroup.org, and that's the best place to reach us. We are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, but the best way to find out about the work that we do and for a listing of me and all the other staff at ICA is to visit our website at icagroup.org. Fantastic.
Thank you so much for your time. It is so appreciated. And if you want to get in touch, check out the website. Dave, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the latest installment of The Curious Capitalist. For more information, you can visit the website connecticut.consciouscapitalism.org.